Hey everybody, thank you guys for being here. We're going to get started in about 5-ish minutes just to catch a couple stragglers, catching on Haley time. Feel free to keep talking amongst yourselves. I'm happy to see you guys all here and we'll get started soon. Thank you.
Hello, can you hear me? Not really. I'll talk louder. Okay, hello everybody and welcome. We are going to start tonight's program. Thank you so much for coming out this evening. Welcome to Town Center West. My name is Lee Dabney and I am the co-director of the Haley Public Library. A few words before we get going. We're about to have our birthday on February 19th. We are really proud of the 107 years that we have served our community. Thank you. Yeah. As we explore the possibility of pivoting from a city library to a district library, we invite you to come and see us next door so that we can share factual information about the library districting process. Plus, you should come next door because our library is pretty awesome. And I hope you all have cards. And if you don't, please come and see us. We'd love to walk you around. We're very proud of our library and our library community. We have exceptional libraries up and down the valley. So thank you for coming out tonight and supporting your local library and a local author, Keith Catalano Wilson. I have come to realize that most people have a story to tell. If you are lucky, a few things may happen. One, they may, with your blessing and your willingness, share it with you. Two, the story is actually interesting to you. And three, they are a good storyteller. I have also come to learn and appreciate that those who are most unassuming often have the most interesting stories to tell. The Wilson family, Keith, Mandy, and their two beautiful boys, visit the Haley Public Library several times a week, sometimes several times a day. Watching families like theirs grow in numbers, years, and height, where the two youngest are concerned, is a privileged experience. I cherish these relationships and feel connected with many of my patrons. But sometimes I realize I really don't know that much about them, or I know a lot less than I thought I did. So I thought I sort of knew Keith. Comes in a lot, I like his family, we chat, all of those good things. I knew that his wife, Mandy, is lovely and wonderful, and she's sitting in the front row, and was one of my son's Wood River Middle School teachers. And for that reason, I made the assumption that Keith is a good guy. He is an attentive and patient dad who comes to the library whenever he comes to the library with one or both of his boys. He is a commercial fisherman who goes to Alaska in the summer to work. And he has worked as an educator and cross-country coach at the local high school. These are all things that reinforce my belief that Keith is indeed a very good human being, so yay. But there was so much more. One day, Mandy came in to the library and mentioned that Keith was at a book signing. And I said, oh, that's so cool. What author? I knew that he was an English teacher and the literary type. She looked at me and said, he's signing copies of his own book. And I said, what? How did I not know this? He wrote a book? And then she looked at me and said, well, actually, he's written two. We chit-chatted a bit. And then I said, where's the signing? Like a library or bookstore? And Mandy said, no, it's at a running store. What? He does ultra marathons. Of course he does. So let's revisit a couple things that I thought I knew about Keith. That he is a commercial fisherman. In my 30 years of living here, I'm sure many of us in this room know commercial fishermen who go up to Alaska for the summer. It's a good way to make money and supplement your living here for the rest of the year. However, Keith takes it to the next level. He grew up in an isolated community known as Naknek, Alaska, which boasts a year-round population of under 500. You must take a small plane or a water taxi to get there. He also started fishing with his father at the age of 11. Fishing is truly in his blood. I knew he liked to run and coach cross country at the high school. Many in our community are very fit and like to get outside. This man has run 25 marathons and over 40 ultra marathons. Need I say more? And we already talked about the book. I knew he was literary, but the fact that he has written 2 books, and I believe he may be working on a 3rd, can we get confirmation on that? Maybe, possibly, get a little thumbs up. To say that Keith is understated about his life is itself an understatement. So what makes a person operate at such an elevated level? Is it hardwired in him, like the generations of sockeyes that he catches in his net every summer, who return to their place of birth, an evolutionary phenomena? Or is it more like the tides, the ebb and flow that wait for no one? So you better fish while the fishing is good. Please join me in welcoming Keith Catalano Wilson as he shares some of his story from his book, A Road Out of Naknek.
Hey, buddy. Oh, and we brought our friend up here. Do you mind if he sits in the chair? Wow. After that introduction, I'm sorry to disappoint, but thank you for making me sound so cool and impressive. To start, I have to take in this audience just for at least a moment, because as a former educator, I'm already just shocked and astonished that I can be talking for actually almost 25 seconds now and nobody's interrupted me yet. So thank you for that. This is about the number, though, where it starts to get feisty. So if anyone needs to go to the bathroom, just go like a grown-up. Well, before I start, I do want to thank Lee and also the rest of the library staff. I love that the library is one of my oldest favorite places to come. Yeah, sometimes multiple times a day. Reading and literacy are very important to me and my family, so thank you for everything you do, not just for inviting me here tonight, but for all of that. Wilder, was there anything you wanted to say? Do you want to say it, or you just want to whisper it in my ear? You want to say it? Okay, go ahead.
Ruining my dress, talking about sockeye salmon.
All right. These people bringing their baby to the, come on, man. So yes, I am a former teacher, and I bring that up because some of you are familiar with this world of fishing, some of you are not. So there might be things I'm saying that don't make sense at times. You might need clarification. So if there's an appropriate time, a natural pause, raise your hand and I might actually call on you. But if you need to go to the bathroom, please, just go. That being said, though, I hope not to hear many general questions about Alaska as a whole. I'm talking about a very specific place in Alaska where I grew up and a little bit of its surrounding area. I didn't place it in such a way, but if you were to put Blaine County, where the Bristol Bay Borough is, where I grew up, it would place the capital, Juneau, somewhere around Chicago. So there's a lot of the state I've never been to, a lot of the state I haven't been to much. And I can always talk a little bit about Alaska as a whole in general, but specifically, I'm here really to talk about just one very specific place. And Here's maybe a better visual. So if you're looking at Idaho, it just more than covers the region that I'm from, Southwest Alaska, and the area that I'm talking about is the white square. So a little bit of visual context. That's where Naknek is. There's 3 towns in the Bristol Bay Borough. There's Naknek, there's King Salmon, there's South Naknek, which Google Maps doesn't even bother placing on the map because there's about 20 people that live there on a good day. And as before I get too carried away, before I start talking too much, I think the best way to introduce this world, to introduce this place, is really just, if you allow me, read the opening of the book. So if you go to page 1, oh right, you guys don't have books. This is where a student says, what page? And then again, no, what page? You teachers, you know what I'm talking about. Okay. The tide waits for no one. I don't know how many times I've heard Dad say it, but he's right. It's both time and tide, as the adage goes, that stayeth for no man. But I've learned that time and tide are synonymous, and they wait for no woman, child, flower, fur bearer, or fish either. I was never a stellar student, but I paid attention to the interesting parts. And as I understand it, gravity between the sun, our planet, and the moon pulls the ocean in a rhythm as reliable as night and day. It creates ebbs and floods in a pattern that the rotation of a clock, the breath in a pair of lungs, or the beating of a heart could never match. The tide was turning long before life existed, and it will keep turning long after we're gone. I've also learned that life on our planet began in the ocean, and it still thrives at every level, from floor to surface. It must have been the tide that brought it ashore. If there's any separation between land and the ocean, it is the shoreline. The border between ripples and ground is ever moving, ever changing. It was only a matter of time before land animals pushed the boundaries. Some of us started returning. At first, we waited, careful not to be caught in a current or eaten by a leviathan. We built vessels, navigated between continents, conquering, using waterways as transport. We scoured the ocean, harvesting shrimp, shellfish, shark, sardines, decimating populations. Still, even after having left more footprints on our planet than any other species, we've explored less than 5% of the ocean floor. The tide, however, washes away all footprints. It washes away a skeleton just as it does a village, a city, a tree branch. The Pacific is the largest of it, but it's all one massive water ebbing and flooding the land. It was this way during the time of a land we now call Beringia, a mass of land that is now Russia, Alaska, the land between them. As the water level climbed, it receded into an isthmus we now call the Bering Land Bridge. People hiked the Bering Land Bridge from Siberia to the Norton Sound, following mammoths, muskoxen, antelope, and others. The water level raised, and the tide was never again low enough to forge from one side to the other. Now, as the tide ebbs and floods against the shores of Russia and Alaska, Beringia is but another part of the ocean floor. Some people migrated north and gave themselves names like Inupiat, Sukpiaq, Inuit. Others migrated east as Athabascans, southeast as Tlingit, Tsimshian, Haida. Farther south, there's Cherokee, Anishinaabe, Shawnee, Shoshone, Sioux, Apache, Anasazi, Aztecs, among others. Maya, Inca, or as far south as south gets. But others stayed pressed against the Bering Sea. Yupik, Unangan, Athabascan, they learned the power of the tide. They learned to harvest their sustenance from the Bering Sea with driftwood bidarkas, harpoons, hooks, grass ropes. They hunted whales, clubbed seals, caught trout, smelt, herring, and salmon. They had no system of numbers, no units of measurement, never had to worry about catching too many fish. Today, the Bering Sea narrows into a corner called Bristol Bay. north of the Alaska Peninsula and south of the Kuskokwim Mountains. It's a body of water where the difference between ebb and flood changes the shoreline more drastically than sunrise, sunset, or the changing seasons. Starting in the late spring, millions of salmon gather to Bristol Bay from the Pacific to fulfill their final purpose. First, they mill and swirl in the salt water like the tick around the face of a clock, each one waiting for the right wind, the right temperature, the right moment in the tide. Then they disperse into freshwater rivers. In schools and surges, they make their run toward their natal lakes and streams. They forage against the current to spawn, die, and continue a pattern that existed before the first Badarka was built and before the first human hand ever touched the water. People established the village of Naknek on the mouth of one of these rivers. The story I heard is they named the village after the word for a muddy place, where the tide climbs to cut banks on either side of the river. They were the first people to catch the salmon there, filleting and cooking them, cutting them into strips to dry over a rack in the open air. They saturated these strips in the smoke of slow-burning birch and alder, beads of oil dripping from deep red meat, with a strip of skin and its golden luster shining in the sun. Then along came Russia. Unangan were called Aleut, mistaking the word for island as the name for people. Athabascans migrated away. The Russians mispronounced Naknek and wrote it on the map as Naknek. They claimed Alaska, later selling it to the US. Shiny metal brought people rushing to it, but in Bristol Bay the promise was salmon. People from all over our planet arrived in places like Naknek, Igigik, Togiak, Dillingham. Like the Yupik, Unangan, and Athabascan before them, they learned to work with the tide. They depended on it to launch sailboats, release nets, catch salmon. Canneries were erected, ports constructed, villages bloomed into towns. The village of Pavik on the north side of Naknek River was connected by a dirt path to King Salmon, the site of an Air Force base during World War II. With the advent of air travel in the King Salmon or airport, more flocked to Pavik than to Naknek, and Pavik was deemed the new Naknek. Naknek became South Naknek. The three towns together became the Bristol Bay Borough. The dirt path between Naknek and King Salmon was paved and called the Alaska Peninsula Highway. Meanwhile, down the continent, across the oceans, salmon populations were disappearing. People wanted to prevent it from happening in Bristol Bay. Some of these people organized and called themselves the Alaska Territorial Fishery Service. First, Alaska had to be a state. Then they became the Alaska Department of Fish and Game. Then their rules were established. Now, based on escapement, nets are allowed in the water during designated times coinciding with the time. It's not a perfect system, but it's an instance where people have learned to work with the tide and limit the harvest. Bristol Bay holds the last, most sustainable fisheries on our planet. In Naknek, we can witness the power of the tide with the naked eye. At the ebb, the Naknek River is a trickle through shifting mudflats. Skiffs and subsistence nets slope downward. Canneries reach onto docks on top of crooked pilings. Drift boats tie together in a line of vessels, stretching into the channel. Flocks of seagulls gather, flapping and squawking, pecking at guts and grime. As the water flows away, pilings rise like trunks of trees. Tributaries as thin as bones trickle into the channel. After the water disappears, movement ceases. Then, as though a table were tilted, the tide begins to shift. White water gushes over the mudflats as boats rock and thrash. Waves chop like men with axes. Pilings sink into the water. Outside the mouth of the Naknek River is the Naknek-Kwijak district of the fishery, where we use our gill nets. Salmon swim into these nets, anchored between buoys placed there by set netters. In deeper water, salmon collide into nets trailing drift boats with aluminum and fiberglass hulls and crash in the fight for the best spot where fish swim thickest. Cork lines splash with writhing bodies. Salmon are caught, delivered, processed, and dispersed from small family operations to Pike Place Market, Tokyo restaurants, London street vendors, and into some of the corners of the world where salmon once returned to spawn on their own. Above the cut bank, cannery workers dominate downtown on foot, moving in groups between meals at Peter Pan, Red Salmon, Silver Bay, whichever cannery houses them. Fishermen emerge from Naknek trading with plastic bags of mac and cheese, baked beans, overripe bananas, heading back to boats, camp, bunks. They stumble out of Fisherman's Bar, Hadfield's, the Red Dog, hoping the season's earnings haven't vanished into the Bermuda Triangle. I didn't make that term up. Pizza boxes leave D&D restaurant strapped to four-wheelers, trailed by hungry tagless dogs roaming town, the homeless population that remains silent until a bear wanders through town. By late July, salmon fade to the occasional splash. Fishermen and cannery workers board planes out of the King Salmon Airport. Boats crowd boatyards, windows are boarded, traffic vanishes. A shout or gunshot may echo without alarm. Cannery gates close. Naknek falls still like the river at slack tide. About 500 people remain, picking berries, hunting, chopping firewood, winterizing pipes. Some are descendants of those who crossed the Bering Land Bridge, others are not. All of them watch the tundra fade as cold air drifts across the tundra like a ghost, yellow leaves falling, nights growing longer. It will be months before the salmon return, before the masses arrive again. Out in Bristol Bay and the Bering Sea beyond it, the tide ebbs and floods as our planet and moon circle the sun. I had a, no, Matt, thanks. So, as an English major in college, I was always taught to bring it from the world of the reader and narrow it down into the world of the writer. And that's kind of what I tried to do there, hence the world as a whole, and then down into the tiny little town. The most important book, actually, to talk about tonight is this book, not my book. This is called Captain Jack's Tide and Current Almanac. This is the Bristol Bay edition of that. This is the book we live our life by. I can see, so I'm going to call you out. One of my crewmen who works for me is sitting here, Emmett Stouffer, right there. The first time I ever picked him up from the King Salmon Airport, I handed him that book and I said, okay, I want you to turn to one of these pages. I want you to tell me what you see. That was 2024. This is actually from 2025. Not that you can tell, but this is, you're looking at the book. This is the top left-hand corner of what it looks like. So typically, even though I talk about the tide in a symbolic and metaphoric sense, it's very literal. We live our life by the tide. Life according to the tide. It comes up, it goes down twice a day. And if you're going to turn the page, everything's going to happen about 45 minutes to an hour later. And it repeats. And we go through our cycle of going to bed and waking up twice a day until you're eating cereal for dinner and mac and cheese for breakfast, or whatever it turns out to be. You do some kind of mental reset. A very different day. So this is June 1st. We were not fishing that day. But we were fishing this day, July 9th. This is a much better tide for fishing. You're looking at a 19-footer that is called a holdover tide, and it stays 19 feet for a little while, allowing more fish to come into the net. And then the 14-footer, that's not great because that's not a lot of time in the water. Some of this stuff will be clear as you see some more pictures. For visual, yeah, this is the outside end of the Naknek River. This is standing in the same spot at low tide and at high tide. So I'm standing on the Naknek side, and across the river is South Naknek. You can almost walk across on the lowest tide. And then I'm talking a lot about salmon, and we do catch all species of Pacific salmon, but when I talk about catching them by the millions in the bay and the millions returning to the bay, I'm mostly talking about the reds, the sockeye. King would be a Chinook, red would be a sockeye, silver is a coho, a chum is a dog, a pink is a humpy. If you there'll be a quiz later. I don't. And then a little bit of a elementary education on the salmon cycle, just in case you're not familiar. Starts as an egg, goes to an alevin, fry, par, smolt. It's about 2 years old. It goes into the salt water. Spends a couple years as an adult, becomes a spawner and a goner, and we repeat the cycle. And really, I could have had the goner after every single one of these, because from the time they're an egg to the time they are a goner, they're fighting all kinds of obstacles, predators, me. Something that is pretty amazing about them, 1 in 3,000 eggs statistically becomes a spawner. So that's how many salmon are feeding the ecosystem, feeding those predators, whales, seals, birds, everything that they have to overcome. So if you were a salmon and you become a spawner, you've made it. And then you get to die and fertilize the ecosystem. One thing about that fascinates me is it fertilizes the ecosystem so well that in places where bears take salmon up onto shore and eat them, and where the remains stay, trees will actually grow thicker and bigger. And I always think that's such a cool thing. And there's a great book actually called Salmon in the Trees, if you're interested in that whole idea. And when they spawn, they turn into this almost cartoonish red. That's the astaxanthin that's in their meat that gives them that deep red color when it's on the plate, which sounds like an advertisement for Wilson's Wild Salmon, which I'm trying not to do, but if you are interested, wilsonswildsalmon.com, look for us.
So you're catching them when they're in their spawning area. Is that
No. We're catching them when they're adults. So they haven't reached the fresh water yet, but they are on their way. Yeah, that's a great question, though. Oops. So some visuals of Naknek. Top left-hand corner, that's the Naknek River leading up into the spawning grounds. This is where they've escaped. So if they've made it here, they might have to worry about some sport fishermen, but they're not going to have to worry about us. They've made it. This is downtown Naknek. The thing about downtown Naknek is that's the end of the 15-mile road. That's the namesake of a road out of Naknek. Spoiler alert, there is none. Technically, there's a 15-mile road from the Fisherman's Bar of the Bermuda Triangle to the King Salmon Airport, and that's the road's terminus at mile 15. And then to get to South Naknek, you either take a boat or you fly. And even to this day, kids that live in South Naknek fly across the river to go to school. This is City Dock. This is how things get in and out. That's how the fish gets out. That's how our vehicles get in. That's how groceries get in. There's a myth that says that the cotton grass indicates how much salmon is going to be returning. It's mostly seems to be consistent, but I've seen variations, so I don't entirely trust it. And then this is flying over the tundra. So growing up in Naknek, people often ask me that, especially when they come visit for the first time. What was it like growing up here? You can't go anywhere. You're stuck here. There's 500 people. Well, what do you do as a kid? And really, the answer is not too exciting. The answer is that you do the kind of stuff that all kids do. You get up, you go to school, you're involved with sports or whatever your activities are. We didn't have a lot of sports. We had basketball, we had wrestling, and we had something called Native Youth Olympics. If anyone buys me a beer after the talk. I'll maybe demonstrate some of that for you, but I'm not going to get too much into that. So my parents, they moved to Naknek in the 1970s. They got away from, they both grew up in the Detroit area. They wanted nothing to do with that. My mom got a job as a special education teacher in the Bristol Bay Borough School. My dad got a job working for the Alaska Department of Fish and Game. When I was born, he stopped doing that. He stayed home during the winter to take care of me, and he took care of the fishing operation. He's the one that took it over after my mom was actually the one that started it. So they were new to town. They were a young couple in this fishing community, adventurous spirits, and my mom and some other of the younger teachers, new to town, said, let's try this whole fishing thing. And they did it. I mean, when my mom tells the story, she kind of describes it as more like a Cheech and Chong go fishing. She might not have taken it as seriously as my dad did growing up with him, which I will talk about. And go figure I would end up here because we loved cross-country skiing. It was a little different. We didn't have groomed trails. We had trudges across the tundra looking for caribou. I'm catching a lake trout. I think I'm like 15 in that picture. And wrestling turned out to be my sport. That's how I started running. I wanted to lose weight, right? I wanted to make my weight class. So I ran and ran and ran. And then the thing is about high school sports, when you're not going on to compete later, high school sports end, right? But fortunately I kept running. And how that came about is every weekend when I wasn't at practice, I just went a little farther, a little farther, a little farther. This kind of sounds like Forrest Gump, I know, but one day I found myself at the road's terminus in King Salmon and said, okay, well, now what? I guess I have to turn back around and go home, just like I always do, but this is as far as I can go. But every time I did, in that teenage state of mind, wanting to get out of my small town in Alaska, I just would look to the mountains on a clear day and think about all the things that I could do with my life and the places I could go, and that was my road out of Naknek. But when I was 11, before that, is when I started fishing. How that started was my dad said, would you like to go fishing? Which in dad speak means, you're going fishing. This is the first picture that was ever taken of us. And I love this picture because it makes me look like I did a whole lot more than I actually did when I was 11. But my dad is about as old as I am. He's like, I'm 41. My dad is 43 in that picture, which is so bizarre to me now. But this day in particular, this is a pretty big day. This is when we used to fish in old wooden skiffs. You're looking at a 22-foot skiff that's 6 feet wide, and you're looking at about 3,000 pounds here, and probably about 3,500, sorry. About 3,000 pounds here and about 3,500 pounds in this boat. So this day, my dad and his crewman, his name was Cameron, he was just out of the Coast Guard. He couldn't continue with the Coast Guard because an oxygen tank burst when he was underwater, and it kind of ruined his lungs, and he just had this continuing cough. But he was built like a bear and very strong, and he could pull nets, and he could pick fish, and he was a great guy to have work for us, with us. So they filled one skiff with fish, but they knew there was going to be more because they kept splashing in the nets, and they kept coming. We always kept a second skiff just in case we needed extra capacity, and we needed extra capacity this day. Thing was, the skiff that I'm standing in had a leak, a slow leak in the bottom. And we noticed the leak coming in. But they had to go pick more fish. So my dad said, okay, Keith, here's a Butterfinger bar and a can of root beer and a bail bucket. We'll be back. And that was my first big experience, my first big responsibility, commercial fishing, when I was 11 years old. And they were back, and everything was fine. And we took the fish to the tender, and a tender is this boat. This is the go-to between us and the cannery. And I say cannery, back then they were still cannering. They're not so much canning anymore. So when I say cannery, it's more of a misnomer, and what I really mean is processing facility. But this boat in particular, I missed this boat. This was an old buoy tender during World War II, and the cannery used to fish for it. Used to have a whole fleet of them, and it's no longer in commission. There's one left. It's called the Beaver. It's still out there, and I don't deliver it to anymore, but I always try to wave to the old skipper that still operates it. But that's what it looks like when we're delivering. Crane comes down, lifts those brailer bags out, puts it into the hold. They take it to the cannery when they're full. And I kept fishing. I kept fishing with my dad through high school. That's the old wooden skiff. Quick story about why it's purple is, remember I told you my mom called it Cheech and Chong Goes Fishing, so they thought it would be kind of funny if they painted the boat purple. And when my dad took over, he said, or she said, if you take this operation over, I want you to always keep painting the skiff purple. Now, he says that she probably doesn't even remember saying that, but he always did until we switched to an aluminum skiff. When we fished, my dad and I, this is my brother-in-law in the back holding the buoys. I'm up in the bow. This is what it looks like setting a net. The corks kind of come out over this roller. And I think my wife will attest that when it's happening, it seems like it's happening a lot more fast and furious when you're right up to the corks and you have to worry about your feed and your alarms, and you still do. Of course. Mm-hmm.
Top section, all kinds of antenna, and
Yeah.
you know, and I'm like, those are your boats, those are so small. What about storm? Like, how do you protect yourself from big waves? So, surprised at the size of the boat.
Waves certainly make things harder. They make everything more difficult. For the most part, I've felt safe on board. But the level of difficulty definitely has to do with the waves. So that question is interesting because I get that question a lot. Do you own your own boat? And I'm like, well, yeah, but it's not quite what you're thinking. It's not like, I'm not in a yacht club.
And when you're pulling the nets in that are full of fish,
Mm-hmm.
what is that like? Maybe you're going to talk
You'll see, yes. But it's a lot of back, it's a lot of shoulders. It's a lot of cursing, it's a lot of fish. It's rough. Or it can be. It's also rough not to catch anything. When I was 19, after my freshman year of college, my parents moved to Wisconsin. My dad and I built a house, and that's the house that they still go back to for the fishing season and beyond. They used to spend about 6 months there during the year. Now they're more like a month there. They're there during the fishing season and just a little bit more. But that was a big shift in life. That's why I shared that picture. But then I didn't stop fishing. I kept fishing through college. I kept fishing as I started my career. I kept fishing as I moved in several different places, 7 different states, including this one, 2 other countries. always kept going back fishing until one year, after years and years of my dad always telling my mom, 10 more years. 10 more years. When he turned 61, he said, 9 more years. And then the countdown was on. So I had to figure out if I was going to keep going, keep doing this without my dad. This picture is me composing my book in my head. It's just it's so much time waiting for the tide. Waiting and waiting and waiting for fish, waiting for the tide to come up as the fish come in, waiting for the tide to come down as they come back the other direction. This is called a screw anchor or an auger anchor. This is what holds our nets in place. I showed you that video a little earlier. That's what the buoy is attached to. So we're getting ready to tie that buoy on before the season. So what I always think, I've been doing this 30 years, but I always find this interesting, is where our base of operations was when I fished with my dad. And this is a place called Graveyard. It used to be a village called Kagyung. It was a native village originally. And then there was a cannery there, Libby's Kagyung Cannery. Same Libby as like Libby's canned corn and Libby's canned peaches. Same company, but they had canned fish, canned salmon back in those days. So that cannery was built in, I believe, 1901, and it operated until 1957, just as more companies started conglomerating and there were fewer actual physical canneries. And because in the 1950s, they allowed power into the bay. Up until then, fishing only happened in double-end sailboats like they did in San Francisco. And that was the law, that was the rule, that was the way it was. But times changed, places like Kagyung disappeared, and then in 1962 there was a big fire and burned that cannery to the ground, or to the pilings anyway. My brother and I are having a pull-up contest on some old canning equipment with the pilings behind us. There was one year, and this is actually why it's called Graveyard, is because there's an old cemetery. A lot of it has to do with the Spanish flu in 1920. So there's a huge cemetery back in the bushes. But one year, because erosion is a constant thing in Naknek and places like Graveyard, especially places like Graveyard, I've seen many, many buildings go over the edge of the bank over the years just because of the constant erosion. And one year there were actually coffins sticking out from the bank, and one that could actually see it. Yeah, see an arm hanging down. And the Russian Orthodox Church has since gone and reburied those coffins. But I often liken Graveyard to the scene of a dystopian future after Armageddon's happened. I always thought it would be a great place to film a movie there. This is called a monkey boat up in the top left-hand corner. This is what actually took the double-end sailboats out into the water. Because they didn't have power, it would take them out. They were out all day. They were at the mercy of the tide. And that monkey boat is also special because my dad took the ship wheel out of it and affixed it to the porch of the house I grew up in, and I used to drive the house. And it's also one of the very few places where you can get cell phone service at Graveyard, along with this place in the middle, this old shack. So he's left, but my 3-year-old, when he was just a month old, I spent a lot of time talking to my wife from in that shack on the phone, just seeing how things were going. This old car in the bottom here, that used to pull, fish down to the dock at the cannery, just by there's a single rail that was behind it, and it parked in the bushes sometime in the 1950s, and it's still there. This is an old bunkhouse. And this is actually taken, these two pictures are taken in the same season, one being after a storm. It's completely gone now, been totally destroyed, as well as many buildings that were on the outside of it. Where we stayed was the old hospital. And I don't remember what crewman it was that was working for my dad that brought up the fact that we stayed at the old hospital. And he said, wasn't the Spanish flu a big thing here? A lot of people died in this hospital. I'm like, oh yeah. Yeah, probably. And I've fished for 30 years now, and this last season, because we have moved our operation, this last season was the last time that I didn't return to graveyard. Because I went to graveyard every year of my life from the time I was 11 to the time I was 37. But then I even made a couple visits after that. But this last season, I never made it up there. But I've heard that since then, this foundation has totally crumbled and it just collapsed. But the building is totally still intact, including the windows, which are the original windows that were put in there. The only windows that we had missing were on this side where a bear came in the door. And bears, thing about bears is they never go out the same way that they come in. So we weren't there. That was before the season. But that's the old hospital, and it's the most inland building in graveyard. So even though it's on the ground now, it'll be the last one to be eroded away. And that's the inside, so that's home sweet home. That's our living room / kitchen. This used to be the doctor's office. When there's older fishermen that used to be there that would tell me about when they first went into the hospital, there were old opium bottles that were still full in the apothecary behind the doctor's office. And I said, well, what happened to them? They gave me a giggle. I don't know. That's the last picture at graveyard of me and my dad, taken by my brother-in-law who was working with us. And it all just kind of felt very normal. We walked away like it was just the end of another season. So what does all this have to do with running? Well, as a runner, I just can't wait to start telling you all about my regimen and my diet. I won't do that to you because we live in this community and you probably know somebody like that. And if you don't know somebody like that, it's probably you. What I will say is running was and is a continuous way to just keep running my road out of Naknek, but I always return. But what does it really have to do with fishing? Running's hard work. It's grueling. You have to push yourself. Even when you're sweating, the finish line is so far away sometimes, or so close. But you just have to press on. Fishing is the same way. So I can speak to the discipline aspect of it. I can also speak to the fact that wild Alaskan salmon, they are an enduring species. Even though 1 in 3,000 actually makes it to their finish line, they have all these obstacles, but they keep pressing forward against the tide, against the current, and some of them do make it. And I can also talk about the dietary needs of running and the protein, the natural protein that's clean and natural that you find in salmon, the astaxanthin, which is the red pigment, which is 700 times more potent as an antioxidant than vitamin C. The catch is that's only when it's combined with consuming omega-3 fatty acids, which conveniently is in wild salmon, which also sounds like an advertisement for Wilson's Wild Salmon. So if you go to wilsonswildsalmon.com, if you feel like it, no pressure. you might be able to find some of that nutritious, wholesome, enduring food. Even if you're not a runner, even if you're not an athlete. So Mandy came into the picture. We were teaching in Oregon. She was across the library in her classroom. And then I asked her out. Spoiler, she said yes to her mistake, because then she found herself in Naknek, Alaska, and she found herself in Graveyard, and she found herself on the skiff. But then she found herself saying, well, what if we started our own business? What if instead of delivering all of our fish to the cannery, to the traditional processor, what if we took some of the best of it back home with us and we sold it ourselves, and we could eliminate that middleman? We could pick the best quality of our salmon, bleed it while it's still alive, take it to a processor that custom fillets it by hand, flash freezes it, packages it, ships it down here for our friends and neighbors in the Wood River Valley, which I know sounds so much like an advertisement. But it is a beautiful product. We are very proud of it, and it is part of the story. So I can't resist talking about it. Even if you don't ever buy from us, it's there, and we're in town. So where we moved is a little closer to Naknek. It's just outside of town. It's where we fish now. And the business had a lot to do with it, because taking fish from Graveyard and that area to a processor depended on perfect conditions, perfect moments in the tide. If the surf was way up, we couldn't walk the fish into the beach. A lot of times our guy on the beach that was waiting for us, the walkie-talkie wasn't working. All kinds of obstacles. So we started that business in 2020, but we might not have gotten as much fish as we wanted to because of all these obstacles that we had. But like I said, salmon have obstacles, and we pushed through them. And when it was time, we bought a new place where my nets are actually right in front of the cabin. And we can load our business fish right into the back of the pickup truck and take them to town ourselves, because Graveyard, you had to get there by boat. Here, we can actually drive across the beach and get to our cabin from town, and we can go back to town. And the other reason that we moved to this spot is because it's family friendly. And my dad took us up there as kids, me, my sister, my brother, on occasion, but it wasn't a big part of our lives until I started actually fishing. And at different times, my sister fished her own operation. My brother still fishes his operation. The Wilsons are a big fishing family. And now we're starting the second generation of it, and possibly a third. My kids have since left, but there's no pressure on them. If they want to do something else, it's totally fine. But in the meantime, they don't have much of a choice. That's our cabin. It's not glamorous. This is what it looked like when we bought it, sitting in a swamp. This cabin was in the same family for 100 years. And the man was 80, no cartilage in his knees. He was still fishing, but he fished just a little bit. He would put his tiny little net on the beach and pull it after the tide went out. And he'd go back to his coffee and his cigars. But he never felt right about selling it to me in this condition. And he wanted to sell it to somebody who lived in Alaska. And I said, well, I'm not living in Alaska, but I'm from here. I've been doing this most of my life. And after a year conversation, he finally said, okay, I'll sell it to you as is, which meant we had to move it. So even though we did actually fish one season out of it like that when it was still in a swamp, I went up in May of 2023 when the tundra was still frozen, and my dad was up there, and essentially we turned it into a sled, and it got It basically got pulled like a sled across the tundra with an excavator. And now it's up and right up on the beach where I can see the nets from it. I can literally sit in a reclining chair and look at my nets fishing and see if I need to be out there or not. And that's Mandy helping us later on move the boardwalks around. The previous owner, he was very ingenious actually. He built everything so that it could be moved this way, building it on skids, building the boardwalks in a way that they could be moved. And that's it in its current location before the tundra greens up. And then this is what it looks like in the middle of the season. Cotton grass, the green tundra, Wilder and Mandy sitting on the front step. That's home sweet home. Hey, you're in this. This is what it looks like setting the inside net from where we fish now. This is Emmett Stouffer, Matt Wild. These are former cross-country athletes of mine and current college athletes, which is why they're able to move across the thick mud in such a way. The skiff, walking out to the skiff. Oops. This is a rare instance, I promise, a rare instance where just the crewmen are in the skiff and I'm standing on shore and was able to take this photo of them. That's what it looks like when we're fishing. The net's coming over across that roller. It's a power roller, which we didn't have when I was a kid. It just gives us a little assistance when fishing's heavy, like so. Those are your feet. So we have permits, and each permit allows for 50 fathoms of gear. So we have one fathom is 6 feet. So we're looking at 300 feet of gear. It looks like this. There's one further outside and one farther inside that's toward the cabin, if that makes sense. Here's Matt waiting to deliver to a tender. Here's Emmett pulling some fish, looking studly.
Is that typically what happens? So the nets like hanging like a curtain and then coming through those holes?
Right.
And getting caught?
Right, they're gill nets. So they're on their way to spawn, but they're still in the brackish water. And as the tide comes in, they move with the tide, and we catch them as they're on their way. They're surging. And then as the tide comes out again, a lot of them will come back in the other direction. They're always kind of pulsing back and forth on their way up to the fresh water to spawn.
So are you pulling the nets in twice a day?
It might be twice a day. If it's twice a day, it's probably a slow day. Sometimes it's over and over and over and over again. Sometimes it's like you're working a typewriter. You pull along, and then, oh, we're still catching them as we're pulling. Okay, let's go back the other direction. And sometimes, working a net that's up towards the beach and one that's farther out, that's the challenge because the tide comes out. The tide goes out, we run out of water, and oh, shoot, we're catching fish over there. We're still catching fish over there. Emmett, you got to get out, and you got to get those fish off the beach before they get into the mud because that's no fun. And we're going to stay out here and we're going to keep fishing this outside net. Like I said, it's hard, grueling work, which is why I hired hard workers, runners. This is what it looks like when we're delivering. So this dock is just about a quarter mile from where we fish, which is very, very convenient. I still like to deliver to tenders just because they have buoys, and when you bounce around, it's just not so jostling. But a lot of times, this is the only way we have available, so this is what we do. It's really fun when your crewman has to bear hug a piling and try to wrap around and get tied to this piling. Well, there goes another load. Oh, yeah. Omega-3 fatty acids, people, that's all it is. WilsonsWildSalmon.com. That's the 2024 crew and the 2025 crew. And full circle, my dad helped me with the peak of the season, which is, that's when we're catching most of the fish. So I'm up there about 6 to 7 weeks a year. Most of what we're catching comes in about a week and a half, sometimes just a week. So I had the most experienced guy that I know working for me. And he didn't boss me around. Yeah, I can't walk away here satisfied if I don't talk at least a little bit about Pebble Mine. Some of you may have heard of it. I'm seeing heads nodding and hearing subtle comments. So Pebble Mine would be the largest open pit mine in the history of open pit mines, and it would be placed right above Lake Iliamna, which is the largest lake in Alaska, and it's the headwaters, so it's where they spawn. The dam that they would build would have to hold tailings forever. Mind you, there's a lot of earthquakes, volcanoes, that kind of thing. It started at about 2005. That was kind of when it came into the spotlight. The company called Northern Dynasty, based out of Canada, and they partnered with a company called Anglo-American, based out of England. That was the Pebble partnership. It has since kind of dwindled back just to Northern Dynasty, among other companies that seem to come and go, but Northern Dynasty they seem to be the constant that's always after the copper, the gold, the molybdenum that's in there. Gold, nice shiny metal. Copper, it's useful. We need copper, I understand that. Molybdenum's mostly used for nuclear warheads. That's what we would be using that for. But a lot of the tailings include cyanide, other such chemicals that would undoubtedly kill the salmon run and essentially kill this whole fishery that's been happening since 1897, actually. But the fish have been coming back since at least the Pleistocene epoch, so we're looking at thousands of years. Fortunately, it's been 20 years, I guess 21 years technically now, and it hasn't happened. There have been developments. Sometimes it seems like it's going to, then it again seems like, okay, we're in the clear. We're never going to be in the clear. It's always something that's going to be there as long as that metal's there, unfortunately. But the most political I'll get is actually maybe a positive spin on the way politics are these days. It does seem to be bipartisan. Maybe not at the state level. The state does seem to say, no, we need to dig the hole. But fishermen that I know, people in the community that lean left or right, all seem to be opposed to this mine. And it's not, I think it has a lot to do with because it's not just about the environment, it's also economic. It devastates both of those things. So it's nice to see in one instance where people do get along for the most part, although there are outliers. So I thought I would close with one more reading before I open it up for the questions. This comes from a time, this is about 3/4 through the book. This was when my dad, my brother, and I were fishing together, and actually my sister and my brother-in-law were fishing together too. We all stayed in the hospital together. But this was a night we loaded up. We had a lot of fish. We'd gone to the tender. We waited in line at the tender. Sometimes that's an hour or two, and we were at the back of the line. When we got up there, the tender said, no, we're full. You got to wait for the next one. So mind you, the tide comes in and out every 6 hours, so we're looking at a 6-hour wait. It was about, I guess it was about 6 o'clock in the evening, so we're looking at about midnight when the next tender would come. And our skiff and my sister and her husband's skiff both waited at that tender. while the next one was on its way. And they were very nice. They fed us a nice salmon dinner, salmon and rice. We took a nap. But as we were there, the wind came up. And that's about where this starts, when we're tied up to the tender. After my sister successfully delivered and drove back to camp. As the waves slam us against the surface, against the tender, the clips on the crane bounce once or twice before we can fasten them to the loops. When the first broiler is clipped and untied from the skiff, it rises against the lights, empties, and lowers back to us. With 1,000 fewer pounds on board, gone from the bow, we rock lopsided in the water. The sooner we can get another broiler offloaded, the better chances we have of not to swamp. Then there is a siren on the other side of the vessel. I hear it over the wind and waves and men shouting. Luke, my brother, freezes. The crane operator disappears. The attention of the crew is on the skiff on the other side of the tender where 2 men have gone overboard. The skiff remains lopsided. It rocks and splashes in the waves, and splashes into the stern have grown. Hey, Dad yells to anyone who can hear him. We got to get more fish out of here, or we're going to swamp too. The scale from the crane is still lowered into our skiff, and I start clipping the next brailer to it. Luke is frozen. Luke, I say, brailer, come on. I can't hear what Dad and the skipper are shouting back and forth through the wind, but Dad starts untying the stern line. Keith, he shouts, untie. Skipper says we're going into calmer water. I release us. Then water dumps into the stern. And we realize our mistake in an instant. Hey, we're sinking, Dad yells, we're sinking. Fish float toward me. The motor is underwater. I've untied, but the line is still in my hand, sliding through them. I tighten my grip and feel it burn through my gloves. I'm bailing, Luke says. I know he doesn't mean the bucket when he crawls to the side and climbs aboard. Metal crashes against metal, splashes between vessels tower above me, waves dump into the skiff. My hands burn as they tighten harder around the line as I slip into the dark. In my peripheral vision, I see Dad climb aboard the tender. Now I'm alone in the skiff, drifting away, fish floating against my hips. Dad and Luke's voices are somewhere in the lights. Screw the skiff, Keith, I hear my brother say. Get up here. Dad says, damn it, that's my son. I drift into the darkness, and for a moment, the waves are silent, almost still. My mind must have gone black. I don't remember tying the tangle into the net, into the mess on the floor, holding the skiff against the current. But I look down, and it's there. It's not a bowline or a keg knot or even a granny knot. It's a wad of line woven back and forth and around itself in some kind of mess that's somehow holding. It will do. I've done what I can. Now I need to get out of this skiff. I step toward the tender, but my ankle is wrapped in the line. My face splashes into the floor. I taste salt. Water pours down my neck. The bail bucket floats by me and disappears. I flap and kick, but it's futile. The more I move, the more the line tightens. Water pours toward me. Water is all I see. Now I realize, surrounded in the dark, that I've come face to face with the tide. And to make it a little more positive, look how cute my kid is. Look how cute. I lived, spoiler alert, and there's a future generation possibly coming. So here we are. I do invite your questions. I know it's a lot to take in. I hope that I had enough world building before that final reading. But I know that a lot of this stuff is new, and if you have questions, please, I invite them. Yes?
What kind of running training are you doing in the winter now?
What kind of running training am I doing in the winter now? Typically in the winter, I'm mostly cross-country skiing and focusing on strength in my garage. That's what I'm doing. But I do run. I do at least try to keep that motion going just to keep the joints and tendons and muscles active so they don't forget how to run. And right now, cross-country skiing means driving up north, but at least I can do that. So, yeah.
I'd be interested in what it was like for you guys over here in the work schedule. But, go back, if you like it.
Yeah, I fish two seasons, the last two seasons of the week. It's definitely similar to running where you look back and say, that was fun, but at the moment, it's, I don't know, I think I've been up there 5 weeks and it's the longest 5 weeks of my life. But at the same time, it is a good time out there, despite, weather and stuff, and getting a good feeling afterwards. It's more, I guess, but.
The question was, what's it like up there for a crewman? And he gave a nice answer, but I'd like to add to it about it being the longest 5 weeks of your life. I totally agree. It's grueling. A lot of times it's miserable. It certainly is fun sometimes. We do have fun. We joke around a lot. This guy is very jovial. He keeps the mood up. I won't embarrass you. I'll stop with there. But something about the tide and living according to the tide and waking up and going to bed typically twice a day, that makes it seem much, much longer. And it is the land of the midnight sun, even though technically our longest day is, the sun sets at 11:55-ish, something like that, so we don't quite get there. But it's cloudy most of the time, so it does get dark. And we are fishing through the night most days, so it does feel long that way. Yeah.
You had mentioned how they told you you would have to wait for the next offload 6 hours away. But I noticed the fish in the boat are not in any sort of water. Does that affect the fish or the taste of the fish?
Oh, I see what your question is.
Yeah, if it has to sit out in the boat while you're waiting, is that ruining your quality?
So the thing also is that a typical summer night is like kind of the days that we've been getting recently here. We've had this crazy unseasonable rain here and the 40-degree temperatures, and a lot of the time it is like that. So it's about as cold as a refrigerator a lot of the time. But no, you definitely don't want your fish sitting for multiple days on end. That would not be okay. So the answer would be yes, it does affect it, but the amount of time that it spends on our skiff typically doesn't. It's not going to diminish the quality of the fish. But that's a great question. But I will have you know that Wilson's Wild Salmon is separate from that and is put directly into slush ice on shore in the back of the truck. So that is actually separate.
It is good. I have had it. You guys.
Yeah. Yes.
With all this new crew in the White House, is the Pebble Mine more likely?
So, this new crew in the White House, boy, it's very scary. And I'm speaking in front of a crowd, so I don't want to say too much, but I will say, actually, this is another very positive thing that happened, and it surprised me, just because, if anything, this administration is not the most environmentally friendly. But during, what was he, 45? During his first term, he did actually tweet, "Don't worry, Bristol Bay, politics won't get in the way of this." And it's like miraculous that happened, and I really think that's attributed to his son's sport fishing on the Naknek River, and that's a place that they like to go regularly. And they like to return to that place and catch their big salmon, and it's like, yeah. No further comments, actually. I'm going to stop there. Earth Justice, Save Bristol Bay, Fishermen for Bristol Bay, Renewable Resources Coalition, Trout Unlimited, a lot of these organizations. You can find all kinds of information there. I barely touched the surface because it's so ongoing and it changes all the time. And I don't know how many letters I've signed and written, and it goes on, and it will always go on as long as that metal's there. Yes?
This is a sustainable resource that you're involved with as a beyond. Any estimate on what the value of that annual fishery brings to Alaska?
Oh, I wish I knew the number off the top of my head. I can see my wife looking at her phone right now, looking that up. But it's definitely a lot, and it definitely outweighs the benefits that anyone would get from Pebble Mine, especially since it's a foreign company. And it might introduce some local jobs, but those local jobs would be very, very temporary, as opposed to this fishery that's been going on since the 1800s. Absolutely, yeah. Right, and then the resources are gone. Yeah. 2.2 billion was the answer to that question. How much does? Right. Question?
Is your Wilson Fabulous Salmon available for retail or here or online too?
Are you a store owner? Yes, well, yes.
No, I'm not a store.
Okay, but yes, it's definitely available online through us, through some vendors in town and elsewhere.
Still carrying it at the yard?
It is there, yeah. Yep. Oh. The question was, what's the population of Native people, indigenous people? I would say it's about half, if not slightly more. A lot of folks, you wouldn't know it. They don't look like it just because everybody has been there. So there's multiple generations that have been there so long and have married into one another, and a lot of folks, you wouldn't know it. But yeah, my best friends growing up were all at least part Native. Aleut and Yupik would be the two dominant peoples there. And Athabascan, but specifically Sukpiaq. Athabascan is the other group. The question was, do either of my siblings live there year-round? My sister's a doctor in Sitka. She's gone back to Alaska in recent years, but she doesn't live in Bristol Bay, no. My brother, so my family moved to Wisconsin when I was a freshman in college, but he did spend part of his junior year and all of his senior year, or something like that. I've kind of lost track of what he did. It's been so long now. We're all in our 30s and 40s now. But, nobody's there now. So. Yes? No, don't be sorry.
It seems like over, in my life, I've understood that, people like you pretty tough to Alaska for the summer, get, fish like crazy, make a killing financially, come back and do whatever, teach or whatever, non-lucrative job that you care about. And from this, I get the sense that it was, kind of like running, like addiction to the grind and the family roots, and, that's what you go back for. And I'd love you to clarify, like, how big is this killing? How big is the net in terms of food?
I'm not going to give you any numbers, but I will say that it certainly fluctuates. It certainly fluctuates. Most of the time, I'm not loving the life. Most of the time, it's, as Emmett said earlier, during his high school career, I often said type 2 fun. It's fun after it's over, and you can talk about it. And we do have a lot of that. But depending on the season, so 2023 was a pretty dismal season for us. We hardly caught anything. 2024, I meant to say. 2024, we hardly caught anything. 2025, I caught more in my first 3 days than I did the entire season before. And it was, the biggest day was actually June 29th, which is unheard of. The peak of the season is usually about July 4th, July 10th, somewhere in there. And that's when that week and a half run happens. But this was early, it was unheard of, it hit hard, it hit us early, it was a surprise. It's a great surprise after it's over, I tell you. But when it's happening, it's very difficult. But simply put, depends on the season. I can talk about, sure. In the 1980s, so my dad in 1988 fished for $2.40 a pound. That's what the canneries were paying. In 2023, we got paid 50 cents. The most I've ever fished for was $1.50. That is what the canneries paid. The money went a lot further in the 80s. But also they didn't catch much in those years. And the reason the price went down after that year was because the Exxon oil spill happened that year. And even though that didn't affect Bristol Bay directly, the reputation of Alaska seafood plummeted, so people weren't wanting to, right? It was the wrong kind of oil in their fish, right? Yes? Yeah, the question was, is the catch limited by Fish and Game? If we're open, if the Alaska Department of Fish and Game has reached their escapement goals for the day, we are given an opening, which means our nets can be in the water. There's no limit on how much we can catch during that opening other than our physical ability to keep up with it. But it remains sustainable, and it's remained sustainable since the 1950s due to that escapement number that they're always trying to reach. And if they don't reach it, we're cut off. You have to stop. There's no fishing happening. Yeah, that's a great question. The question was, how are they keeping track of that number? People do take samples up in the headwaters, but most of the time, most of the numbers come from, it's literally someone standing at a tower with a clicker looking down at the water where the river is clear and they're going click, 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 click. And that's literally how it happens.
And then how do you receive word that it's now open?
So the question was, how do we receive word that it was open? In the modern day and age, in the world of Starlink, I mean, I can look it up at any time, but in the days of Graveyard, the only connection we had to the outside world was our radio. So listen in at 9, noon, 3, and 5. Oh no, 6 and 8, excuse me. And they'll say, this is the Alaska Department of Fish and Game in King Salmon with an announcement for permit holders in the Naknek district. The numbers are this. The goal is that. The Naknek district will open to set gill net gear for an 8-hour period from whatever it happens to be, midnight to 8 a.m. or whatever it happens to be. Of course. I have books. They're available. I'll be hanging out for a little bit just in case you're interested. But thank you for coming. Thank you for your great questions. Thank you for your interest. WilsonsWildSalmon.com.